My mother says, successful businessmen deserve my home office more than freelancers who work from coffee shops. My brother has now moved in his vision board. Hi everyone. Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. Original post. I, 30M, never thought I'd be writing one of these posts, but here I am, absolutely seething about what's happening in my own home. Let me give you some background because this situation has been building for months, and I need to know if I'm being unreasonable or if my family has completely lost their minds. 2 years ago, I started working as a freelance software developer. After saving for years, I finally bought my first house, a modest 3-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. One of the main reasons I chose this particular house was the perfect 3rd bedroom that I immediately converted into a home office. I'm talking custom built-in shelves, a standing desk, dual monitor setup, soundproofing panels, the works. I probably spent $8,000 getting it exactly right. Here's where things get complicated. My brother James, 32M, has always been the golden child in our family. While I was grinding through computer science courses and working part-time jobs to avoid student loans, James was pursuing what he called entrepreneurial ventures. Translation: a series of failed businesses that our mother Patricia, 56F, consistently funded because she believed in his vision. 6 months ago, James's latest venture, some kind of crypto consulting firm, went belly up. Shocking, I know. Our mother suggested he move back home temporarily, but his pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, he's been couch surfing with friends and occasionally staying in my guest room when things get particularly tight. Now, I'll admit something that's apparently become my fatal flaw. I do work from coffee shops sometimes. Maybe 2 or 3 times a week, I'll pack up my laptop and head to a local cafe for a change of scenery. It helps me think, I enjoy the ambient noise, and frankly, after spending days alone coding, it's nice to be around people. I still use my home office for video calls, intensive coding sessions, and whenever I need to focus on complex projects. It's probably a 60-40 split between home and coffee shops. Last week, James was over for dinner, and he made a comment that set off alarm bells. You know, it seems like such a waste that you have that whole office set up when you're always working from Starbucks anyway. I laughed it off and explained that I use both spaces for different purposes, but he kept pushing. I'm just saying, if you're not using it most of the time, maybe someone who actually needs a professional space could benefit from it. I should have shut it down right there, but I tried to keep the peace. Big mistake. 3 days later, my mother called me with a proposal. Apparently, James had been talking to her about his newest business idea, something involving dropshipping and affiliate marketing, and how he desperately needs a professional space to conduct video calls with potential clients and partners. She suggested that since I prefer working from coffee shops anyway, maybe I could let James use my office, just for important calls. I explained to her exactly what I explained to James, that I use my office regularly and need it for my work. Her response: "But honey, you can work from anywhere with just a laptop. James needs to project a professional image for his business. Don't you want to support your brother?" The guilt trip was in full effect. I held firm and said no, but I could tell this wasn't over. James has been texting me articles about the benefits of working from public spaces, and how dedicated offices are outdated for digital nomads. My mother has called twice more, each time with increasingly creative arguments about why James needs the space more than I do. The thing that really gets me is the complete dismissal of my work. Because I'm a freelancer who has the flexibility to work from different locations, somehow that means I don't have real work needs? Because I'm not wearing a suit and taking calls about synergy and disrupting the market, my professional requirements don't matter? I worked my ass off to buy this house and create that office space. I use it regularly for legitimate work that pays my mortgage and bills. But somehow, James's theoretical business that hasn't made a dime deserves my space because he needs to project success? Am I crazy here? Should I be more accommodating to family? I feel like I'm being gaslit about my own work habits and needs. Update 1, 2 weeks later. Well, I thought setting firm boundaries would be the end of it. I was wrong. So wrong. After my last post, I had a long conversation with both my mother and James. I explained in detail how I use my office, why I need it, and that the answer was a firm no. James seemed to accept it. Spoiler, he didn't, and my mother said she understood, though she made sure to add that she was disappointed in my lack of family support. Fast forward to last Monday. I had an early morning client call scheduled, so I decided to work from a coffee shop afterward since I was already dressed and out of my routine. I came home around 2 p.m. to find James's car in my driveway. Weird, but not unprecedented. He sometimes stops by to raid my fridge. I walked in to find him sitting at my desk on a video call, using my ring light and my professional microphone, gesturing dramatically as he pitched something to whoever was on the screen. He had moved my personal items, cleared space for his own notebook and water bottle, and was acting like he owned the place. I stood frozen in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt his call but absolutely livid. When he finally noticed me, he held up a finger, the universal "give me a minute" gesture, and continued talking for another 10 minutes while I stood there in my own home, waiting to use my own office. When he finally ended the call, his first words weren't an apology. They were, "Oh hey, didn't expect you back so early. I thought you'd be at the coffee shop all day." As if my schedule was his to plan around. I demanded to know what the hell he was doing. His response was infuriating. "Mom gave me her spare key. I had a really important call with a potential investor, and I couldn't take it from my friend's apartment with his kids running around. I figured since you were out anyway, it wouldn't hurt anyone." The entitlement was staggering. When I told him this was completely unacceptable and he needed to leave immediately, he actually had the audacity to look hurt. "Come on, Michael, I just needed a professional space for one call." It went really well, by the way. The investor was impressed with my setup. My setup. That he was claiming credit for. I told him to return the spare key and never do this again. He left, but not before making a comment about how successful people help each other out, and how he'd remember this when his business takes off. The next day, my mother called. But instead of apologizing for giving James the key without my permission, she was excited. James told me his investor call went wonderfully. The professional setting really made a difference. See what can happen when we support each other. I lost it. I told her she had no right to give out keys to my house and that James had no right to use my space without permission. Her response chilled me. "I just thought since you weren't using it at the time, it wasn't a big deal. James is trying so hard to make something of himself. Don't you want to see him succeed?" The manipulation was obvious, but it still stung. When I held firm, she sighed and said she'd talk to James about being more considerate with scheduling. Scheduling. As if the issue was timing and not the complete violation of my privacy and property. Since then, James has been blowing up my phone with his successes. Every positive response he gets to his pitches is accompanied by a text about how the professional setting is making all the difference. My mother has called twice to update me on his progress, and how proud she is of his entrepreneurial spirit. Meanwhile, I've had to change my locks because I don't trust that they won't make copies of the key. I've also installed a security camera in my office, which feels insane but necessary. I'm working from home more often now, not because I want to, but because I feel like I need to guard my own space. The worst part? I'm starting to second-guess myself. Maybe I am being selfish. Maybe I should be more supportive. But then I remember that this is my house, my office, and my livelihood they're dismissing. The gaslighting is real, and it's exhausting. Update 2, 1 month later. I thought installing new locks and security cameras would solve the problem. I thought setting clear boundaries would be enough. I was naive. It started small. James began showing up unannounced during times he knew I'd likely be home, always with some excuse. He needed to borrow something. He wanted to discuss business strategies. He was in the neighborhood. Each time, he'd find a way to mention how his business was struggling without a proper workspace. How the coffee shop Wi-Fi wasn't reliable enough for important calls. How background noise was unprofessional. My mother ramped up her campaign too. Every conversation somehow circled back to James's needs. Did you know James lost a potential client because he had to take a call from his car? James is so dedicated, working from the public library until it closes. If only James had a proper space, imagine what he could accomplish. Then came the ambush. Last Sunday, I was invited to my mother's house for what I thought was a regular family dinner. When I arrived, I found not just my mother and James, but also my Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, and my cousin Jennifer. It was a full intervention about my selfishness. The talking points were clearly rehearsed. My aunt opened with how family helps family. My uncle talked about how he'd helped his brother get started in business years ago. Jennifer, who I've always been close with, said she was surprised by my lack of support. And through it all, James sat there looking like a martyred saint, occasionally interjecting with comments about how he understood my position but was disappointed. The kicker was when my mother pulled out her tablet to show everyone my social media posts. She'd screenshotted every single check-in I'd ever made at a coffee shop, every photo I'd posted of my laptop at a cafe, every casual mention of working remotely. "Look," she said, passing the tablet around, Michael clearly prefers working outside his home. So why is he being so stubborn about a space he barely uses? I tried to explain that those posts represented maybe 30 to 40% of my work time, that I didn't post every time I worked from home, that social media wasn't an accurate representation of my daily routine. But the narrative was set. In their minds, I was the selfish brother hoarding resources I didn't need while poor James struggled. The pressure was immense. For a moment, I actually considered giving in just to make it stop. But then James made a critical error. He started talking about his plans for our office once he was allowed to use it. He wanted to repaint it, add his own decorations, maybe move some furniture around to optimize the space for real business. That snapped me back to reality. This wasn't about occasionally borrowing my office for important calls. This was about taking over my space completely. I stood up, told them this discussion was over, and left. The family fallout has been swift and brutal. I'm getting texts from relatives I haven't heard from in years, all with opinions about my selfishness. My mother has moved from guilt trips to outright emotional manipulation, sending me old photos of James and me as kids with captions like, "Remember when you used to look out for each other?" But the worst part, James has started his own campaign. He's been telling anyone who will listen about how his own brother is sabotaging his success. He's crafted a narrative where he's the hard-working entrepreneur being held back by his jealous, selfish brother who has more than he needs but refuses to share. Some of his friends have actually reached out to me, trying to broker a compromise. One suggested I could use the office mornings and James could have afternoons. Another proposed alternating days. When I point out that it's my house and my office, they act like I'm being unreasonable. "It's just space," one said. "Why are you so attached to a room?" It's not about the room. It's about the principle. It's about the complete dismissal of my work, my needs, and my boundaries. It's about the entitlement and manipulation. But try explaining that to people who've already decided you're the villain in this story. I'm exhausted. I'm angry. And I'm starting to realize this isn't going to end until either I give in or cut contact with my family. Neither option feels good. Update 3, 6 weeks later. I'm writing this update from a coffee shop, but not for the reasons you might think. I need to be somewhere public because if I write this from home, I might put my fist through a wall. 2 weeks ago, I had to leave town for a 3-day client meeting. It was a huge opportunity, a potential contract that would set me up for the next year. I'd been preparing for weeks, and the in-person meeting was crucial for sealing the deal. I asked my neighbor Sarah to keep an eye on things while I was gone. I told her about the situation with James, and she promised to let me know if she saw anything suspicious. I thought I'd covered all my bases. I was wrong. When I got home, I immediately knew something was off. There was a different energy in my house. I headed straight to my office and found it completely transformed. My carefully organized space had been optimized, as James would say. My dual monitors had been pushed aside to make room for a cheap plastic organizer filled with what looked like drop-shipping catalogs. My programming books had been relegated to a corner, replaced by self-help business books with titles like Millionaire Mindset and Crushing It in E-Commerce. There was a whiteboard on the wall, my wall, covered in James's handwriting. Sales projections, business ideas, contact names. A vision board was tacked up next to it with pictures of luxury cars, expensive watches, and beachfront properties. My comfortable office chair had been replaced with some ergonomic monstrosity that probably cost a fortune. But the real kicker was the professional photo shoot setup in the corner. Ring lights, a backdrop, a tripod, all positioned to create the perfect, successful entrepreneur aesthetic for video calls. My office had been turned into James's personal Instagram-worthy fake success studio. I called my mother immediately, and her response told me everything I needed to know. "Oh, you're back." James said the meeting went wonderfully. He's been so productive in a proper workspace. Did you see how professionally he's organized everything? When I demanded to know how he got in, she casually admitted that she'd convinced my neighbor that there was a family emergency and needed to check on the house. Sarah, being a kind soul, had let her in. My mother had then let James in and left him there to set up properly. Set up properly. In my office. In my house. That I pay for. I drove straight to my mother's house, where I found James holding court in the living room, showing off photos of his office to relatives who dropped by. He was mid-sentence, saying something about how professional presentation is half the battle in business, when he saw me. The confrontation was ugly. I told him to get every single item of his out of my house within 24 hours or I'd call the police. He tried to play it cool, saying I was overreacting, that he'd made improvements to the space. When I wouldn't budge, he switched to victim mode, talking about how he was just trying to make something of himself and I was standing in his way. My mother jumped to his defense immediately. "Michael, he's done nothing but improve that space. It looks so professional now. And his business is finally taking off. He had 3 successful meetings there this week. Why are you trying to sabotage him?" The gaslighting was unreal. I was sabotaging him. He broke into MY house and took over MY office, but I was the bad guy? I told them both that this was the final straw. James had 24 hours to clear out, and then I was done. No more family dinners, no more keys, no more discussions about this. The family explosion was immediate. My phone started ringing before I even got home. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, everyone had an opinion about my cruelty. The narrative had been set. James was a struggling entrepreneur trying to better himself, and I was the selfish brother with resources to spare who chose to hoard them out of spite. But here's the thing. I started getting messages from some of James's recent clients, too. Turns out, he'd been telling people that it was his house, his office. He'd been building his entire business persona on a lie, and now these people were confused about why his brother who lives with him was throwing him out of his own office. The depth of the deception was staggering. He hadn't just stolen my space. He'd stolen my entire setup and claimed it as evidence of his success. Every video call from MY office had been used to build a false image of accomplishment. And my family had enabled every step of it. Final update, 2 months later. This will be my last update on the situation, and I wish I could say it had a satisfying resolution. But life isn't always neat, and family betrayals leave scars that don't heal cleanly. After my ultimatum, James did remove his things from my office, but not before making sure to document the eviction on social media. He posted photos of himself sadly packing up his business materials, with captions about how sometimes family lets you down, and real entrepreneurs overcome any obstacle. The comments were full of support for him and criticism for his unnamed, unsupportive brother. My mother went nuclear. She called me every name in the book, accused me of being jealous of James's success, and said I'd shown my true colors. When I pointed out that James's success was built on lies and theft, she said, "At least he's trying to make something of himself instead of hiding behind a computer screen all day." That comment revealed everything. In her mind, my work wasn't real because it wasn't flashy. It didn't involve suits and buzzwords and vision boards. The fact that I'd built a steady, profitable freelance business meant nothing compared to James's smoke and mirrors. The family divide became permanent. I'm persona non grata at family gatherings now. My cousin Jennifer, who I thought would eventually see reason, sent me a long message about how blood should come before money, and how disappointed she was in my priorities. My Aunt Linda told mutual friends that I was the kind of person who would let family starve rather than share my blessings. But here's the twist that almost makes it worth it. James's business collapsed within 3 weeks of losing access to my office. Without the professional backdrop for his video calls, without the ability to project false success, his house of cards crumbled. The investors he'd been courting realized something was off when his follow-up calls came from noisy coffee shops or his friend's apartment. Some of them reached out to me directly, trying to understand what had happened to the successful entrepreneur with the impressive office setup. I told them the truth. Every single one of them. How he'd been using my office without permission, how the entire image was fabricated, how even the books on the shelves were mine. Most were appalled. One investor even forwarded me an email chain where James had specifically referenced his office setup as evidence of his business acumen and financial stability. My mother, faced with the collapse of James's latest venture, has doubled down rather than admit she was wrong. The new narrative is that I sabotaged him by exposing his minor exaggerations, and that I couldn't stand to see him succeed. She's refinanced her house to give him startup capital for his next venture because she believes he was so close to making it big before I ruined everything. James himself has gone full victim mode. He's telling anyone who will listen that he's a casualty of toxic capitalism, where family bonds mean nothing. He started a podcast about entrepreneurship and overcoming adversity, recorded from his friend's basement, where every other episode seems to include veiled references to unsupportive family members who don't understand the grind. The security cameras I installed have captured him trying to get into my house twice more, both times when he thought I was out of town. I've had to file a police report and start the process for a restraining order. My own brother. It's surreal. But here's the thing, I'm doing better than ever. That big client meeting I mentioned? It went perfectly. Without the family drama draining my energy, I've been able to focus on my work. I've raised my rates, taken on more challenging projects, and even started mentoring other freelancers. My home office is once again my sanctuary, set up exactly how I need it. I've also started therapy to deal with the family trauma. My therapist has helped me understand that this was never really about the office. It was about respect, boundaries, and the fundamental dysfunction in how my family operates. James was raised to believe that his needs supersede others, and my mother enables it because his failures reflect on her parenting unless she can blame someone else. I've lost most of my extended family over this. Holiday invitations have dried up. Family group chats have gone silent. But I've gained something more valuable: self-respect and the knowledge that I can stand up for myself even when everyone says I'm wrong. To anyone facing similar situations, your space is your space. Your work is real work, whether it happens in an office building or a home office or a coffee shop. You're not obligated to sacrifice your needs for family members who refuse to respect your boundaries. And sometimes, the price of peace is letting go of people who only see you as a resource to be exploited. My office door now has a deadbolt, my security system is top-notch, and my boundaries are firmer than ever. James still occasionally sends flying monkey relatives to guilt-trip me, but I've gotten very good at saying, "That doesn't work for me," and ending the conversation. Success is the best revenge, they say. But in this case, simply having the peace to work in my own space, on my own terms, without drama or manipulation. That's worth more than any family relationship that came with such a heavy price tag.